Well, good morning, everybody. I am out here bright and early. I'm trying to do a little bit of clipping and primping in the potager along the boxwood hedge, and also this variegated euonymus that I've got kind of in the center to give a little bit of color contrast. But one question I get all of the time that I thought I would address with you guys today is, what about boxwood alternatives? If for some reason you can't grow boxwood, or you don't want to grow boxwood because you're concerned about boxwood blight or boxwood moth, or just forever whatever reasons, or you just want some tough alternatives, I thought we'd talk about that today. So, but first, let's go back to the source and let's talk a little bit about probably my favorite evergreen. I've never met a boxwood I didn't like. Obviously, neither did the birds. Stuart, look at that cardinal up there. I wish you could capture it. I don't know if you can or not. So many people always ask, please show them the cardinals because they don't have it in their area, have one in their area. So anyhow, hopefully we were able to capture that. But I digress, so let me go back to what I was talking about. Boxwood alternatives. So this, FYI, for those of you who haven't heard me say it before, this is wintergreen boxwood. It's really tough, it can handle heat, it can handle cold, and it performs beautifully with lots of heavy clipping. I also love green mountain boxwood, green velvet, green mound, winter gem. I love baby gem. There's all sorts of varieties that I love. The only one I stay away from probably is English boxwood, because I'm a little bit nervous about boxwood blight, and it tends to be a little bit more susceptible to that than other varieties. But what if you just don't want to grow boxwood at all, but you want to get the look of boxwood? And truth be told, you guys, it's not so much the plant that I love about boxwood. It's the form, kind of the glossy green, and the way it can adopt an architectural shape that I think lends itself beautifully to that design practice of something formal against something informal, and something structured against something kind of blousy. So now, what about some alternatives? Well, some people say, well, like a small-leaved euonymus would be a good alternative. And I don't know that it would be my first recommendation, because it is subject to scale, and it's just a little bit more high maintenance, I think. Another really beautiful one that I would probably have more of in my garden, in my next garden, and by the way, you guys, I'm probably like you, and you're probably like me. We're always thinking about either the future in our gardens or our future gardens. And right now, I'm kind of thinking about a future garden. If I ever started a new one, I would have a lot more dwarf Youpon holly. Let me say that again, dwarf Youpon holly, which when clipped into an orb, a round ball, looks very, very much like a boxwood. There's lots of it in my neighborhood. Its foliage is a darker green, but it's got the same tiny leaved kind of canopy. It is readily receptive to clipping. It can look beautiful. It also has glossy leaves that capture the light, and I'll show a couple of examples of others that grow it in my neighborhood. But it is a wonderful alternative. The other reason I like it is it can also handle some shade, and it can handle sun. So that's one option. It's very common, and it's pretty readily available anywhere. But I want to show you a couple others that I am really infatuated with. You guys know that I talk a lot and represent some southern living plants, and here are two that I am so excited about, some of which I already have growing in my garden, and another one that I am getting ready to introduce in a variety of different ways. I am more excited about this plant than I have been about any plant in a long while. So number one, let me start out with the one I'm already growing. I love it. This is Bambino pineapple guava. It has this wonderful gray foliage, which is another reason I'm just so excited about it, because I am really, really into anything with gray, blue-gray foliage. This one has, oh, it's got kind of a velvety feel to it. It puts out edible flowers. It also puts out kind of a tropical fruit. Now mine has not done that yet. Those elements, the flower and the fruit, will be kind of tinged with red. Mine hasn't done that yet, but just stay tuned and I'm sure it will. This one is in the ground. It's been here for, I think, a year and a half to 2 years now. It has performed beautifully. Actually, it looked like this pretty much all winter long, so it was, for the most part, evergreen. It naturally grows in kind of a compact shape. Let me read what the tag says. 3.5 feet high by 3 to 4 feet wide. It's hardy to zone 0 to 10, so it did brilliantly for me in my zone 7 garden. As you can see, if I wanted to, I could prune it a lot harder and make it much more formal, but I love the way it looks with the textural contrasts with this arborvitae and other gray things like this lavender growing in my garden. And I like it so much, I think I'm going to introduce a little bit more of it. I've got 2 pots of it here, and you can just see it's got that rounded form of, or kind of, that's not necessarily rounded, maybe an oval form of a boxwood leaf. So to me, this also speaks of all of the things I love about boxwood, but in a very Mediterranean kind of California language, and I think a color palette that's very appropriate to the South and the Southwest. I do, just in case, we had a mild winter last year, just in case we have a really hard winter, I will mulch it. But I love the way it looks with some other plants. And in future videos, I'm going to show you how I style it in pots and some other ways with some other things like Little Miss Figgy, that's also a southern living plant, lavender, rosemary, and that kind of thing. So I love this. This is one of my very favorite alternatives to boxwood, I guess. But the plant that I am just ecstatic over is new to me this year. And some of you may be familiar with it. And if you are, please tell me what your experiences are with it, because I'm just fascinated by it. This is Distylium, and that is Distylium. And you guys, I'll put a link to these at the bottom. I know sometimes I forget to put my links at the bottom, but I will. You can just go to the Southern Living Plant Collection to find all of them. But this is new, and it is just perfect for part sun to shade, part sun to full sun, just like boxwood. And if you look at the contrast, Stuart, if you can kind of show how it does look rather like a boxwood. Now I would say that this variety, which is Jewel Box, I love that name, is probably closer to the form and the color of a Green Mountain boxwood, which is one of my top 2 very favorite boxwoods. And the other thing I love about this is, if you look at it, it will have a shape and a form at its mature height, which is about 2 to 3 foot high by 3 to 4 feet wide, that will require minimal pruning, but it very much has that pretty kind of gumdrop form naturally as it grows. It stays compact, but it's got that kind of sheen to it. And I just love how the leaves are set and how they grow off of these branches, which are strong and would hold up to high winds, all sorts of things, pest-free. I just really love it. Now the other thing I like about it, which is a little bit different than boxwood, again, is going back to my new infatuation with things that have a blue-gray tinge or a gray color to them. So this will, I think, harmonize beautifully with that Bambino Guava and all of the other grays that I've got in my garden, like my Sedum Autumn Joy. I love this Chef's Choice Rosemary. Smells so good. I just love all of that. I especially love it because this stuff looks great at the end of summer, which is really a hard time for plants to look great, at least in my growing area here in Oklahoma. But these guys stand up to the heat. They look great, great structural form, which is so important when the bloomers kind of start to poop out. So that is one variety, and that is, again, Jewel Box Distylium. It's hardy to 0 degrees to 10 degrees. I'd still probably mulch it to make sure that it could overwinter if your zone gets a little bit colder than that. But that's number one, and it's got just wonderful new buds on it. So that is one variety of Distylium. Now, Stuart, I'm going to stand up to show you this other one. This one is, these are, like I say, these are new to me. Castin Bronze Distylium. This one grows just slightly taller, 3 to 4 feet high, 3 to 4 feet wide. Again, it's hardy, 0 to 10 degrees, and its new foliage when it comes out is tinged with red. So I'm thinking, my head is just going crazy, all of the different ways that I would use it. Number one, it would be beautiful harmonizing with any plants that put out new growth that is slightly tinged red. So think Nandina, think certain climbing roses, because boxwood and roses is a classic combination. This would be a great substitute for that. Really anything, Photinia, things that come out tinged red. Really, really beautiful. And I think it would also be cool, you guys, I love green on green. That is a quintessential southern practice, probably up north too. Green on green, one kind of evergreen juxtaposed against another kind of evergreen, maybe with a variance in leaf size. So think hollies with boxwood in front of them, or Indian hawthorn with boxwood in front of them. But wouldn't this be beautiful and a really subtle contrast to have this jewel box in the foreground and this Castin Bronze slightly behind it in just a slightly different size with a slightly different color palette, or maybe staggered in some kind of staggered fashion, like one of these and two of those, because I love to plant things in threes. Anyhow, I am more excited about this plant than almost any plant in a very, very long time, again, because it emulates and simulates my beloved boxwood. Now, this would also be great if you've got a really tough exposure, say a western exposure, and you're trying to symmetrically, that's hard for me to say, frame, say, the entrance to a door, to a porch, to a gate, or whatever. This would be absolutely beautiful in pots. It would be cool cascading down with something like dichondra, foliaged plant. It would be really beautiful. It would couple brilliantly, I think, with any kind of flowers in soft pink or white. Again, I'll put a link down below. If you don't have room for it now, just put it on your wish list, because this is definitely going to be on my list of plants I'm going to use in my future garden or in my present garden in a different way. I'm going to get ready to do on LVTV a bunch of stuff about Mediterranean plants, wonderful potted specimens, and this will fit in brilliantly with them. So I absolutely love that. Okay, so those are a couple from Southern Living. Now, if you live a little bit further south, if you live maybe in zone 8, then you might consider Silverado Sage. Silverado Sage has a boxwood leaf form. I have turned these into a topiary form, but they will grow very bushy as a shrub plant. These aren't in bloom right now, but they put out a sweet little fuchsia bloom that is just perfect for this time of year. I've got a couple of these in standard form, but I have found in my garden they don't reliably overwinter, so I put these in the greenhouse. But if you are slightly south of me, or they're in a protected area that doesn't get really cold, and you mulch them real well, this would be a brilliant alternative to boxwood. If you're a Texas gardener or California, this would be just a brilliant substitute. And again, it's got that gray kind of furry foliage that I am very, very enamored with right now. This is kind of maybe an unusual plant to think about, but again, if you're in a little bit warmer climate, or even in my Zone 7 garden, I have started to grow a lot more rosemary in the ground, and heretofore I haven't been able to do that. This is Chef's Choice rosemary. I've talked about it before. I'll put a link to a video that I think we did about it in the past. This is its 3rd year, and I've got 3 clumps of it. Stuart, I don't know if you can pass along this border. There's another clump of it down there. I've got 3 large clumps. Now, I have let this grow in a more cascading form, but I have seen it in other gardens where it is clipped in a more formal way, in more of a globular form, a spherical form. That is typically what we kind of think of for boxwood. Again, this is Chef's Choice. There are probably other varieties as well. I love this look. These are the kind of plants, if you guys are familiar with Patina Farm and Velvet and Linen on Instagram, these are the kind of plants that she can grow in her California landscape, and they all have a tinge of gray to them, and that's kind of a direction that I'm increasingly taken. Now, don't overlook other more traditional kind of forms of evergreens that would give you that year-round evergreen structure in a global form. These are columnar, but think about arborvitaes or hinoki cypress. If it's cold enough in your area, it gets too hot for those here, but those kind of cypresses. You can also look at plants that I would say you might want to consider. They don't look and don't perform identically to boxwood, but you can clip things as common as different kinds of barberries into very tight forms, globular forms. They are equally as tough as boxwood. Again, very amenable to clipping, to hard clipping. But they're not necessarily evergreen. If you have a really hard winter, they can be prickly, and in some places they can even be invasive. So again, know where you live, know the environment in which you garden, so you can take those kind of things into account. So those are just some of my favorite things that I'm considering right now as boxwood alternatives. If for some reason you don't like boxwood, or you're afraid to grow it, or you want to try something that's just a little bit more distinctive, then look at some of these options and see if they can fit into your garden somewhere. It's always fun to try new things, but it's also good to always have a contingency or a backup plan in case you have problems with something that you absolutely love for various reasons. And so these are just some of my best recommendations, you guys, for some backups to boxwood.